This is the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Welcome to the Architect Exam Podcast. I'm Emily, and today we're diving into a topic that is the financial backbone of every construction project, and that is the distinction between hard costs and soft costs. I know that talking about the financial side of projects and construction budgets might not be the most glamorous thing in architecture, but understanding this information is essential for knowing what things actually cost so that you can charge accordingly. I promise to make this overview as painless as possible as we talk through finances. So let's think of this episode as construction economics for people who'd rather be designing really cool buildings, because let's face it, that's most of us. Whether you're studying for the ARE, preparing for the CDT exam, or already in practice, understanding these cost categories is absolutely crucial. It's not just exam knowledge, it's the difference between a project that will run smoothly versus one that will run out of money halfway through. Definitely want to avoid that happening. So we'll break down what these costs are and how they work together, who manages them, and why they matter for you as an architect. Think of this as your financial roadmap through the construction world, and there's no accounting degree required. So first, let's start with the basics. Some of the fundamentals of hard costs and soft costs. What are these two cost types? Hard costs are all tangible, physical expenses that create the actual building. These are the brick and mortar costs, literally. If you can touch it, see it, or trip over it on a construction site, it's probably a hard cost. Think of hard costs as the Instagram-worthy parts of a project. The concrete being poured, the steel beams being hoisted, the walls going up. These are the photogenic stars of a construction show. And on the other hand, we've got soft costs. These are intangible costs or indirect expenses that are necessary for the project, but they don't actually become physically part of the building. These are more of the behind-the-scene costs that make the project possible. If hard costs are the actors in our construction movie, soft costs are like the director, producer, costume department, and the catering table. You don't see them in the final film, but without them, there would be no show. So both types are absolutely essential. You can't build a project with only hard costs because who would design it? How would you even get the permits? And you certainly can't build a building with just soft costs because architectural drawings alone don't keep the rain out of a building. There are some key differences in how these costs behave as well. Hard costs are tangible. Unlike your client's vision that seems to change with every Pinterest board they discover, they're generally easier to estimate and quantify. For instance, how much concrete do you need? How many light fixtures do you need? These quantities can be calculated from the drawings. And soft costs can be more variable and difficult to predict. For instance, how long will permitting take? Will the city require additional studies? These factors can be a lot harder to nail down. Hard costs occur primarily during construction. That's when you're paying for the actual material and labor that's taking place. Soft costs can span over the entire project lifecycle. They start long before construction, like during design and during the permitting phases, and they continue during the construction process, during financing and insurance, and some even extend after completion, like marketing and moving in coordination. Think of soft costs as the project's shadow. They're always there, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, but they're always following the project from the start to the finish. Now, let's understand some of the fundamental differences between hard and soft costs. Let's get more concrete about this. This is where the rubber is going to meet the road here in this podcast today, where the budget meets the spreadsheet, so to speak. So with hard costs, let's go over some examples. Hard costs are construction materials. This is the physical stuff that gets built and installed on a building. So think of concrete foundations and slabs, structural steel, wood framing, exterior cladding, and even roofing. All of those interior finishes like insulation, drywall, paint. Also, don't forget windows, doors, hardware. There's plumbing fixtures, piping, electrical components, lighting fixtures, all of those physical components that make up the building. Something else that makes up hard costs are material shipping and delivery. These costs add up faster than those Amazon Prime packages at your door. Labor is another major hard cost component. These are the skilled and unskilled workers who turn those materials into the building. This includes general labor, skilled trades like electricians, plumbers, carpenters, equipment operators, and site supervisors. Remember that labor includes not just wages, but benefits, overtime, and labor burden cost. These folks aren't working for exposure and free lunch. Equipment costs are significant too. All of the machines and tools needed on the site, like the heavy equipment, like bulldozers, excavators, cranes, and even the smaller tools for specialized equipment. Don't forget scaffolding, formwork, safety equipment, and all the fuel and maintenance costs to keep all that equipment running is a hard cost as well. Site work is also a hard cost and includes everything happening outside the actual building, like excavation and grading, foundation systems, site utilities and drainage, parking lots, sidewalks, and landscaping. All of that is considered a hard cost of the project as well. Building systems, which are the functional guts of a building, like your HVAC systems, ductwork, electrical, lighting, plumbing, and fire protection, even the security and data systems of a building, all the wiring, pipes, ductwork, conduits that is needed for your building are a hard cost. And then even the pretty stuff, like the interiors and exterior finishes. This includes flooring, wall finishes, cabinets, millwork, paint, wall covering, and tile work. Exterior landscaping and hardscaping is also considered a hard cost. Remember, if it appears in the construction documents and the contractor has to build it, it is a hard cost. If your client wants to save money by cutting hard cost, they are literally taking out pieces of the built building. So let's switch now to some examples of some soft costs. Soft costs include design and engineering fees, usually running about 8 to 15% of the hard costs. This includes architectural services from schematic design through construction administration. It covers structural, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineering design. It also includes civil, geotechnical, and landscape designs. And don't forget all of those specialty consultants for things like acoustic control, lighting, sustainability, and more. All of those design fees and services are considered soft costs. So yes, even though it is our creative genius at need, it is considered a soft cost, which probably explains why some of our clients think our fees are negotiable, unlike that concrete foundation that they're pouring. We're kind of like the ghostwriters of the construction world, invisible in the final product, but essential to the creation. Permits and regulatory fees are a major soft cost category as well. This includes the cost of a building permit, impact and connection fees, zoning and variance fees, environmental permits if they're needed, and inspections by authorities having jurisdictions. Those are all considered soft costs. You know that feeling when you finally get your building permit approved? That is the sweet relief of one soft cost hurdle cleared. Legal and accounting services are an often overlooked soft cost. This is part of the contract preparation and review process. Sometimes when your client is working on securing a property or land, that is the land acquisition paperwork that needs to happen is a soft cost. Tax planning, financial reporting, these kind of paperwork, essential services that don't directly build the building but are needed are a soft cost. Financing costs can be enormous. For instance, a construction loan can have a big financing cost. So there's loan origination fees and points and appraisal fees that your client or a project owner will need to navigate, and that needs to be considered when assessing the budget and soft cost fees. Interest is the most demanding soft cost of a project. It does not take weekends off, it doesn't stop for bad weather, and it never calls in sick. If only contractors were that reliable. It's kind of like the unwanted house guest of soft costs. It just keeps hanging around month after month, eating away at your budget. Insurance and bonds protect the project, but they don't physically build it. This includes builder's risk insurance, professional liability insurance, performance and payment bonds. All of those are needed for a project, and they are considered soft costs. Project management costs, including the owner's representative fees, including construction management services and administrative costs for coordinating and overseeing a project. All those project management services are considered a soft cost as well. Another soft cost are marketing and leasing costs. So these are important soft costs in commercial projects. This includes marketing materials or advertising. It could also include broker commissions, lease-up costs in order to get tenants into the building. So those should be considered as well when considering all costs of a project. Many clients don't realize how substantial these soft costs can be. They focus just on the construction contract, which is the hard cost, and sometimes get blindsided by the cumulative impact of these invisible soft cost expenses. But everything adds up, right? So they should really be considered, and it's our job to help our clients see the full picture.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, your guide to passing the ARE.
Hey there, this is Michael, and I have a quick favor to ask. If you're finding value in this free ARE podcast, please take a second to follow, like, subscribe, and leave a review or a comment on whatever platform you happen to hear this podcast. Your engagement lets us know that people are actually listening, and it inspires us to keep creating more podcast episodes. But honestly, what matters most to me isn't the likes or the follows. It's sharing this podcast with others who need it. When I was studying for my exams years ago, I felt completely alone and everyone was hoarding information instead of helping each other out. And it was that frustration that led me to start Young Architect back in 2014 with a simple mission: help the next generation of architects become the most successful generation of architects. So please share this podcast with your colleagues, friends, or anyone tackling their AREs. By sharing knowledge, we all rise together. All right, back to the podcast.
Now that we've covered what's included in each cost category, let's zoom out and look at the overall meaning of this. So let's look at the big picture. How much of a project budget typically goes into each category? The common rule of thumb is that hard costs usually account for about 70 to 80% of the total project budget, with soft costs making up about 20 to 30%. But that's just the starting point. The actual ratio varies significantly depending on the project type. So residential projects will often have a lower soft cost percentage, typically just 10 to 20%. Single-family homes have simpler design and shorter timeframes. They face less complex regulatory requirements, and they generally involve smaller teams. But beware, custom homes with complex design and high-end finishes can have much higher architect fees and higher permitting costs, which pushes that soft cost percentage up. So that Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired masterpiece you created isn't going to just design itself, and those soft costs can increase very quickly. Commercial projects typically see soft costs around 20 to 30%. This includes office buildings and retail centers. They inevitably have more complex regulations and permitting requirements, so they face higher financing costs due to those larger loans and larger durations. Project schedules are just inevitably longer. And for commercial projects, don't forget all those marketing and leasing expenses that add up as well. Institutional projects such as hospitals, schools, and government buildings can reach 25 to 35% in soft costs. These projects often require complex designs with specialized consultants. They involve multiple stakeholders and approval processes, and they face stricter regulatory requirements, which are, the permitting and city requirements. And they need more extensive commissioning and documentation. So that's usually like the public projects will just have a lot more requirements in that regard. I actually once worked on a project where the soft costs ended up being about 40% of the total project budget. We had to hire a lot of specialized consultants. We had to apply for additional permits, and there was a really complex financing situation happening. So these soft costs felt kind of invisible because it was happening in the background, but it almost cost just as much to build the building itself. So the client kept asking why we needed so many consultants, but because there were so many specially designed spaces, we needed to bring in all the expert and the pros to help us make these design decisions work. So those costs added up very quickly. The costs interact with project timeline in interesting ways as well. So the soft costs are usually heavily front-loaded, meaning they happen before construction, and they start piling up long before construction even starts and before ground is even broken. So the design and engineering work happens months, if not years, before you actually are pulling the trigger and starting construction on a project. Also, permits and the approvals on the city level have to be secured up front before you can start, and that can take a long time. And financing can also take a long time as well. But it doesn't stop there. Soft costs continue throughout the project once construction does start. And loan interest also accrues every month if the project is, secured through financing. So that interest is being charged every month that the project takes to be built as well. Insurance premiums will also continue to accrue, and project management expenses are ongoing as well. So it's important to stay on budget, but also on schedule so that you're not having these project management and teams, working longer than they estimated. So meanwhile, hard costs follow what we call the S-curve model. You'll see low spending at the beginning of a project during site preparation and maybe construction of a building's foundations, but then the costs will actually peak during the main construction phase. And towards the end of a project, they'll start tapering off again when you're kind of wrapping up a project and you're doing finishing work. But you'll see that S-curve model through that hard cost and through that construction phase. If we graphed project spending over time, soft costs would actually start high and continue steadily and then slowly taper off towards the end of a project. And hard costs would actually start low and rise dramatically when construction starts and then slowly fall off and taper off to completion. But here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when a project gets delayed? So time-dependent soft costs increase substantially when there's delays. Every month of a delay means another month of loan interest accruing, or maybe you'd have to get extended insurance coverage, or you have to have your project management team on board for longer since the project's delayed and you need them to help navigate that delay. And these costs continue regardless of construction progress. The meter is going to keep running even if the workers aren't. So to catch up, teams often compress the schedule, which can increase hard costs. And this means over time, labor costs, or you might be spending more money to kind of express order or express ship materials to a site. And kind of rushing a schedule could lead to, loss in quality of work, or maybe you have to do rework. But sometimes projects will condense a schedule and try to make things happen quicker, just in the case or in the event that there is a delay. So for example, let's say you apply for a permit for a project and everything seems to be going well, but there seems to be a holdup at the permitting office for some reason, and there's a 3-month delay in getting that final approval. You're just kind of sitting and burning the clock while you wait for that final approval so you can get started. So when thinking about experiencing a permitting delay, like if you have like a 3-month permitting delay, it's kind of like you've caught a taxi to get somewhere and you're sitting in the taxi, but you get stuck in traffic for some reason. Even though you're not making any progress and you're not getting anywhere in that taxi, that meter is still going and you're still being charged. So even if there seems to be nothing happening, or if it's something that you didn't cause and you couldn't prevent, there's just something that's causing a delay, it's still costing the project and the client and the project owner a lot of money. Delays don't necessarily change the design or the project at all. It's still the same material and the same outcome, but there's some serious cost implications if you do experience a delay. So think of your, construction projects like being charged for that taxi while you're sitting in traffic. You're paying for time, not for the distance. So we've covered a lot about what these costs are, what they include, and how they interact with each other. But there's another fascinating dimension to consider, and that's how different project participants view and interact with these costs. One of the fascinating things about hard and soft costs is how differently they're viewed by each stakeholder. Architects, contractors, and owners see costs differently throughout a project. So as architects, our fees are a soft cost due to the project, but our design decisions directly impact what gets built and directly impact the hard cost. So we're in this very interesting position where our work is both a cost itself, but what we choose to design is also a major component of the hard costs that happen later on. So we really have to balance the design quality with what we know the budget constraints are. So therefore, when you're making decisions like something custom, if something custom comes up, of course, you want to work on an exciting project with custom work, but you need to kind of reel in, is there a budget for custom work? Even if custom work does give the client ultimately what they want, do I, as the architect, have the time to detail the custom work? Is that in my budget? And then is it in the construction budget later to source and install custom work? So even though you really want to do it and maybe your client really likes it, if it blows the budget, it doesn't win. So we're really responsible for helping the owner establish realistic budgets from the beginning through our design choices. And then when we design and make any design changes, we need to understand how it affects the hard cost of eventually being constructed and our soft cost of having to design it or potentially redesign it if there is some change in project budget or schedule. From the contractor's perspective, it's a little different. So contractors are primarily focusing on the direct hard cost. They'll submit a bid based on detailed material and labor that is estimated on how long it'll take them and how much it'll take them to build the project. And they focus intensely on construction efficiency and productivity. So they coordinate with us, the architect, on any design issues that may affect their cost or change their cost. So that's when they're going to send us an RFI, a request for information. they're not just trying to annoy us with paperwork, they're actually trying to get to the bottom line of what the intention is and clarify anything that they might not understand so they can do it the right way the first time. They're essentially just trying to clarify any details that maybe they didn't understand on a first read to make sure that it doesn't change their price and the bottom line. Some contractors also manage certain soft costs like permits and temporary facilities, but their main focus is executing the physical construction efficiently, which is that hard cost. And then from the owner's perspective, the owners of a project are most concerned about potential cost overruns, both hard and soft costs, and they need clear communication about budget impacts of any changes. So many owners, especially first-timers, project owners, don't fully appreciate the magnitude of soft costs until they're deep into the project. And we've all had that awkward client conversation where they might overreact to the cost of something, like, what do you mean it costs $50,000 just to connect to an existing sewer line? I think for a lot of people who maybe don't have a lot of experience in this trade, in this industry, they get a lot of sticker shock when it comes to design costs and building costs and what it takes to build successfully. So that's something to also keep in mind when navigating projects and our clients' experience in projects.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
So let's go over some common misunderstandings and conflicts when it comes to project budgets, hard costs, and soft costs. So there's a lot of different perspectives, right? Owners, again, they will sometimes focus just solely on hard costs or what the cost is to build when they really should be considering more. And therefore, they're underestimating soft costs. But the scope of what each contract covers can be ambiguous. And this is where change orders come into play, and change orders can affect both hard and soft costs in ways that aren't always obvious. For instance, a change that's made might actually warrant some redesign. And so if you're redesigning and the architect is actually, putting pencil to paper and redesigning something, there's a soft cost associated with that. So responsibilities for managing specific costs can sometimes be unclear, which leads to some conflicts. I once had a client tell me that they wanted to save money by just completely cutting out the construction administration phase, which is a soft cost, but they really weren't appreciating the value of that phase and they didn't want to pay for it. And as a result of that, when there was some issues with the contractor's work and they installed something that was wrong, they installed, for instance, in this scenario, was the wrong window. It's because nobody was reviewing their window order or their submittal. The contractor just went and ordered windows and doors for a project without having a second set of eyes, usually the architect, put their eyes on that order to make sure it was along with the design intention of the project. And then when the material arrived on site and they went to install it, it didn't fit and it didn't work. And so the resulting cost of that, the resulting hard cost of that was needing to get new windows and doors that actually fit the project. And the cost of having to do that reorder and that rework far exceeded what we were charging for the construction administration phase. So I think that project owners and our clients really need to understand that paying for a service up front that will help manage these potential issues is a lot more, cost effective than actually having a contractor have to place an order, do it wrong the first time, and then have to redo the work later. So when you're trying to save money by skipping essential services, it's kind of like you're skipping oil changes on your car. I don't want to pay for an oil change. It's inconvenient and it's money that I don't have. But if you don't do it, your car is going to break down. So it's, planning and agreeing to these certain essential services is like guaranteeing regular maintenance of your project and therefore its success. So how do we handle all this complexity of balancing hard and soft costs? There are some proven approaches, such as doing a thorough early planning and accurate estimating upfront. And this is essential. Create a detailed cost breakdown from the beginning of your project and include every category. And you can reference historical data or similar projects in the past, or maybe set industry benchmarks and use this as a tool to reference your current project against. And you could also seek out expert input on some soft costs before setting project budgets. So that'll help keep your project budget as accurate as possible just from the beginning. And also for a project, you should set a realistic contingency planning And this is going to protect your project in case there is some unknowns. You will set up a realistic contingency amount to be able to take care of those unknown amounts. So this is usually about 5 to 10% of a project's budget for new construction, or the scarier projects, which are renovations. And I say scary because sometimes there's unknown conditions that you find yourself in once you start demolition or renovating. And so for renovation projects, you'd actually have a 10 to 20% contingency just to account for the unknown. It's inevitable with existing projects. You may also consider separate contingencies in the hard cost category or in the soft cost category. And you may document reasons for contingency use to improve future estimates. So what I mean by that is, let's say you worked on a hospital project and you know that you had a 10% contingency, but you actually ended up spending 12% of the project budget on contingencies. You now know when you work on a hospital project again in the future to plan around 12, maybe even 15% for a contingency, just so that you have that wiggle room and you don't go over budget. It's also really important to have clear communication between all parties involved on a project. This is going to prevent misunderstandings, and the best way to do this is to hold regular budget review meetings and to definitely develop comprehensive cost reports and show both hard and soft costs on these cost reports and share them with the team. This creates transparency, which helps to prevent change orders, and it addresses all costs that are impacted when changes are made. It's also good practice just to have regular monitoring and control systems in place on a project from early on. This is going to help keep things on track. It'll also help track any spending against the budget in real time. So as something is purchased, you're comparing it to the amount that was allotted in the budget for that item. You could forecast final costs based on your current data. For instance, let's say you saved a little bit in one category. That means you might have a little bit more in the budget for another category that may go over budget. And therefore, you're taking corrective action early before an issue arises later. Another best practice for cost management is to leverage technology for tracking and analysis to improve accuracy. So use construction management software to your benefit. Implement BIM clashing detection and quantity takeoffs to make sure that the project budget is for the right amount, for the right quantity that was specified, and use collaboration tools with all stakeholders and contractors on a project to be able to track and analyze the things that are being bought, the things that are being installed, and make sure everything is still on budget. Remember, we can't manage what we don't measure, and we can't measure what we don't understand. So that's why having this hard and soft cost framework is so valuable. All right, everyone, we covered a lot of ground today, from basic definitions to complex relationships between different cost types and project stakeholders. So what have we learned on our journey through the land of construction costs? To recap, hard costs create the physical building. Hard costs are tangible, they're visible, and they're directly related to construction. This includes the material, the labor, the equipment, and all the physical, tangible components that make up the finished building and finished structure. And alternatively, soft costs enable the planning, the approval, the management. And alternatively, soft costs enable the planning, approvals, and management of the project. So they are intangible, often invisible, in the final building and the final structure, but they are essential to make that building happen. So soft costs include design fees, permits, financing, insurance, and project management. So both hard and soft costs are essential for project success, and their independence affects budgeting, scheduling, and risk management in construction. You simply cannot have a successful project without properly accounting for both. This topic actually brings back a lot of funny memories to me working in architecture and construction administration. Michael and I have written dozens of practice questions about hard costs and soft costs that we share with ARE candidates and our boot campers. I remember it especially well because we wrote many of these questions on Christmas Day. This is what we do in our downtime, everyone. So there I was supposed to be, enjoying Christmas holiday with my family, but Michael and I are cranking away on these questions, and we're debating about which fees are categorized as hard and soft and that kind of gray area as to which category they fall into. But I'm just sharing that so you know how dedicated we are to this information and sharing it with everyone. So for those of you who are studying for the ARE, this knowledge is directly applicable to several divisions in the ARE exam, especially the practice management division, the PCM exam. There's a lot of questions that frequently address a project budget and budget concepts. Also, the project planning and design exam, the technical exam, this covers a lot about cost implications and design decisions and how that changes your cost. Also, PDD, Project Development and Documentation Division, there is a lot in there about constructability and cost considerations in a project. And finally, the CE division, that's Construction and Evaluation exam, has a lot about cost control throughout construction. But if you're not taking the ARE and you're just in the real world practicing this, you'll use this understanding for client budget discussions and expectation management. So when you're working on contracts with your clients and maybe you're in some contract negotiations and working on a fee proposal, keep these costs in mind. And as you develop your project budget, you'll be able to better monitor it, knowing what hard and soft costs are, and you'll be able to better educate your client as well. This would be great for risk management and for when planning for contingencies for your project. Remember that understanding hard costs and soft cost won't necessarily help you win any design awards, right? It's not very glamorous, but it might just help you stay in business long enough to win those awards later. So as architects, we may be hired for our design vision, right? But we are really valued in our ability to turn those designs into a reality and to stay on budget. So understanding the full picture and the big picture of all of these items and how they interact is very important. And it's the key to delivering successful projects and building your client trust. We don't want to just promise them beautiful buildings that aren't able to be built. So the two go hand in hand. Everyone, if you found this breakdown today of hard costs versus soft costs valuable, and you want to dive deeper into project budgets and project costs and other critical practice knowledge, we've got you covered. For more detailed guidance on hard costs, soft costs, and dozens of our other essential ARE topics, please check out ARE 101 at youngarchitect.com. In our ARE 101 course, we cover these financial concepts in much greater detail with plenty of practice questions and real-world examples that Mike and I have both experienced in the field. We want to share those with you to help you better master this material so that you can do well in your exams and just in your everyday practice. So if you're looking for more resources to help you pass the ARE, the Young Architect Academy offers comprehensive study materials designed specifically for busy professionals preparing for the architect's registration exam. So until next time, everyone, thanks so much for listening in today. This is Emily reminding you that understanding costs doesn't make you any less creative. It makes your creative visions possible. Thanks again, and see you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Architect Exam Podcast. Ready to take your studying to the next level? Visit our online ARE Architecture School website at academy.youngarchitect.com to learn more about how we can help you. See you next time.